Welcome to the IT presentation on student finances for 2020-2021. And here to give you advice is our Access Officer, Valerie Moore.
So this morning I'm really going to start at the beginning, which might be a little bit boring for some of you because I know that you're well on the road to organising your grants and your back to education allowances and so on. But I'd just like to start with some of the basics just to make sure that everybody's on the same page and that nobody has missed a step in the process. So be patient. So I'm going to just talk a little bit about the Free Fees Initiative, the SUSI grant scheme, the Back to Education allowance, the Student Assistance Fund, the Government Laptop Scheme, the 1916 Bursary, the Benevolent Fund, the Kingdom Education Trust, Cara Credit Union Education Awards, St Vincent de Paul, MABS and Tax Relief. So they're the areas I plan on covering this morning. Okay, so the Free Fees Initiative, this relates to tuition fees. There's two types of fees in third level. There's a tuition fee and there's a student contribution charge. The student contribution charge, most of you are probably quite familiar with now. It's €3,000 per year per student, and every student is liable for this charge, and every student will be billed this charge. However, some students might be eligible to have that fee covered by their SUSI grant. So I'll talk about that again in a minute. So the Free Fees Initiative relates to the second charge, which is the tuition fees. And a lot of students aren't familiar with this initiative because it really doesn't kick in, or you don't become aware of it, unless you're not eligible for the Free Fees Initiative. And the majority of our students are actually eligible for it, so they're none the wiser about it. So to explain what it is, you must be an undergraduate student on an approved course in an eligible institution. That would be all of you on this morning. You must be an EU, EEA, Swiss state, UK national, or hold official refugee status. And you must have been resident in the EU, EEA, Swiss state, or UK for 3 of the last 5 years. And if you have been to third level before, then you may find that you need to double check with admissions that everything is okay for you with regard to this fee, because usually it's for students who've never been to third level before as well. However, there are some exceptions, so don't panic if you're there going, I was in third level before. Just please contact admissions. I can't stress that enough, because if you are liable for a fee, you'll probably find out in November, and you may not have been expecting it. So it's not a nice surprise to get. So if you've been in third level before, please speak with admissions to double check that everything is okay for this initiative. If you are in a position where you have to pay a tuition fee, you may be eligible for some tax relief on that. So just check at revenue.ie. The SUSI grant scheme then covers the student contribution charge. It might cover 50% of it. It might cover 100% of it. If a student does have tuition fees, it might also actually cover those tuition fees, and it may also give a monthly maintenance grant over 9 months of your academic year. Just to be really clear on this, the Back to Education allowance for anybody who's lined up for that scheme does not cover fees and charges. Sometimes that is a misunderstanding just through the information that's put out there. Back to Education allowance does not cover these fees and charges. If you're looking to have fees and charges covered, you must apply to SUSI for the SUSI grant scheme. The SUSI grant scheme is means tested. It's based on the income for January to December 2019. And it's still open. They're still taking late applicants, and they feel probably up to the 1st of November. I did contact them to confirm the closing date, and they don't have it confirmed just yet, but they reckon it'll be the 1st of November, same as last year. So if you haven't applied to SUSI, there is still time. When it comes to SUSI, one piece of advice I would give you is please figure out what you think you're entitled to. Take a little bit of time to look at the income thresholds and to look at the number of dependents in your family and whether you live within 48 kilometres of the campus or not, and figure out what you think you should actually get. Should you get 1,500 of your student contribution charge? Should you get 3,000 of the full contribution charge? Should you be getting a maintenance grant? Should you be getting some fees covered? The reason I say this is if there is a mistake, the likelihood is you're the only person who will actually notice the mistake, particularly if the mistake doesn't go your way or go in your favor. So I do advise you to be clear on what you think you should get. So if you don't get that, you know to query it and contact Susie about it. If there has been a change of circumstances since the tax year 2019, you may apply to Susie to have that change of circumstances considered. So for example, you might put in a Susie grant application and you might find you're over the limit for the highest level of grant. But you may find that your circumstances have changed this year and you are now below the income threshold if they based it on this year's incomes, whether it's yourself or dependents or spouses and partners. If that change in circumstances is more than likely going to carry on or endure for some time, it's not temporary, then they can reassess you now and look to see if you're eligible for a grant based on your new circumstances. So again, just please be aware of that. And if that is your situation, do contact Susie to see can they reassess you now. If they don't think you're eligible to be reassessed now, they will take it into consideration for your grant next year. So when you're renewing your grant next year, you may wish to draw their attention to the fact that your incomes had changed this year. There's also a student grant scheme specifically for students who are asylum seekers. Asylum seekers are students in the protection system or students with leave to remain who are not at deportation order stage may be eligible for support through this grant scheme. If you're familiar with this scheme but didn't think you were eligible, please be aware that they have made some changes to that scheme only in the last number of weeks, and they're now considering applicants for this scheme who've been in the protection system or application stage for 3 of the last 5 years. So please double check that scheme if it's relevant to you to ensure that whether you are or are not eligible for it. The closing date for receipt of applications is the 6th of November 2020. The criteria are that you have a combined period of 3 years or more in the protection process or leave to remain, but not at deportation order stage at the 31st of August 2020, that you have been accepted to an approved course, and where you are pursuing a course of higher education, that you've secured a place through the CAO. The Back to Education Allowance is a Department of Employment and Social Protection scheme. The SUSI grant is more a Department of Education scheme. So they are 2 separate schemes, but they do talk to each other a little bit. As I said earlier, Back to Education doesn't cover fees or the student contribution charge. What Back to Education is, it's really permission to keep the welfare payment or accumulate the credits that you are already getting when you started college, because that's the key to Back to Education. So a student doesn't become eligible to apply for Back to Education just because they are mature and have become a student. They're asking for permission to keep what they already have. To qualify for Back to Education, you must be on a qualifying payment, and you must be on it for 9 months at the time that you start college, at least 9 months, which is 234 welfare days. And welfare days, if you're calculating them yourself, there are 6 welfare days in the week, not 7. You must be on the qualifying payment immediately before you start your course. And generally, if you're on Back to Education, you won't qualify for the maintenance part of the student grant, the SUSI grant, but you may be considered for the student contribution charge. Individuals who are on one-parent family payment, disability allowance, invalidity pension, or illness benefit must also meet the criteria for the Back to Education allowance beyond their payment for a minimum of 9 months, but they then have the choice of staying on their qualifying payment and not actually going over to Back to Education allowance. The reason this might benefit a person on one of these payments is that they then could be considered for some of the maintenance grant with SUSI and not just the student contribution charge. Just to note that people on illness benefit need to actually be on illness benefit for 2 years. The qualifying period is longer. If you are on a rent allowance, then you, regardless of being on one of these 4 payments, you may want to transfer to back to education, because if you don't, then you could expect to lose your rent allowance, and because you wouldn't be eligible to keep it while you're in college. But if you're on the back to education, you would. The COVID-19 PUP, Pandemic Unemployment Payment, is being considered now by under BTEA. They have made, I suppose, some exceptions around this payment. They're not requiring students to have the 9-month qualifying period if they're in receipt of this payment. If you're getting the payment and you wish to apply for back to education, you must first transfer to a job seekers payment or other qualifying payment. I mean, this might be an assumption on my part. I don't work in the department, but I'm taking it as if somebody is transferring to a qualifying payment, they will need to meet the criteria for that qualifying payment. But once they've met it, they can go on to their back to education allowance straight away. Just a heads up, if you're on back to education allowance and you're working, just be aware that any earnings that you have while you're working might affect your back to education. It might affect the amount that you get. They do means test the monies that people make while they're working. Just to be clear on it, for your payment, I would recommend that you do speak to the Department of Social Protection if you're taking up work, just so you're clear before you do it what impact it will or won't have on your back to education allowance payment. Different qualifying payments would have different rules, so best to check that directly with the department. Stephanie, would you like to jump in on the 1916 bursary scheme?
Yeah, Val, I suppose, guys, just to let you know, like Val said, the closing date for the application for part 1 of the application will be Friday the 16th of October. So if you are someone who's already applied for the part 1 of the application, or you're going to do it maybe after today, there's a chance that you will get part 2 of your application in the coming weeks. So they'll be sent out in the next few weeks as the applications start to come in, so that you have a bit longer maybe to fill them out. They're open until, I must check the date again, I think it's the
31st of October.
31st of October, that's it, yeah. So you have up until then to complete part 2, which is the chunkier of the applications. Like that, I think all mature students for the most part should be applying for it. Part 1 is very, very straightforward. It's just your basic details and your CAO number, or if you don't have your CAO number, if you're a part-time student, they just ask you to send an email to the SOAR for Access email account. All the details are on the website, our own website, or the SOAR for Access website. They can be gotten through that. If you have queries that you want to direct to us, you can absolutely do that as well. So you can email access@ittralee.ie. It's also, I suppose, important to note that we'll be running some clinics. They'll be online this year, of course. I'm just finalising the dates, but they will be sent out as well by the SOAR team in the next coming weeks, and we'll have them on our website as well once we have them finalised by the end of this week. So I hope to do maybe 3 clinics in the weeks leading up to the deadline. So if you do have questions, you can come and join them. But like that, at any point, if you're going through your application and you're thinking, I'm not sure about X, Y, or Z, just make sure you get in contact with either myself or the SOAR team, and we'll help you through them at any time. One of the most important things when you're filling out part 2 is that any documents that you're asked to upload as proof of evidence for the target groups or anything like that, or your income, that they're good quality images. If they're blurry and they can't be read, they're actually just completely disregarded, and nobody will come back and ask you for a better version of it. It'll just be disregarded completely. So it's really important that you do a full application with everything that you're asked for. And if you're unsure of what you're being asked for, again, just get in contact with us, and if we can find a kind of reference photo for you or something like that, we'll get those to you as well. But there's loads of information on the websites for you guys to refer back to. And I think it's also important to note that if you do make it through the first part and you get the second application, that once those applications are finished, they're not assessed here in IT Tralee, they're assessed by the central unit in UCC. But what we do here in IT Tralee, once those final lists of eligible applicants come back to us, we usually schedule interviews, not interviews, they're more like meetings, they're not that formal either. But obviously this year we don't have the luxury of doing that in person unless something changes in late October and there's a miracle. But if not, we'll probably be doing something online like that with myself, Valerie, and maybe another. We usually have someone from the Students' Union and another member of staff, just to meet you guys and kind of get a full, well-rounded picture of your circumstances and where you're coming from and why this bursary might be really useful for you, because obviously applications can only tell us so much. But like that, if you have any questions, just pop us an email at access@ittralee.ie, or you can go directly to the SOAR team as well. There's no problem with that. And if you have any questions about the 1916 bursaries, you can pop them in the chat, or like that, we can address them after as well.
Thanks very much, Steph. I'm just going to repeat a little bit of that just to capture the subtitles, if that's okay. So the 1916 bursary scheme is to encourage participation and success by students who are socioeconomically disadvantaged and from groups who are most underrepresented in higher education. ITT has 7 bursaries this year for new entrants. Only first-time new entrants are eligible, and each bursary is worth €5,000 per year for the duration of the student's course. Students can still apply. There's 2 stages to the application, but you must start with part 1, and you can still apply at the moment online at soarforaccess.ie/1916-bursary-fund/, and the closing date is 5 p.m. on Friday the 16th of October. Stephanie hopes to run some clinics in the weeks coming up to this closing date for the second part of the application, which is the 31st of October. And Stephanie will be running some information clinics between here and then for students. Another fund on campus is the Student Assistance Fund. This is a European social fund. Like so many, I suppose, of our funds, they're funded by the European Union. And the one thing about the European Union funding sources is they are only for EU nationals. Non-nationals are not eligible for the EU funded supports that are available in the third level institutions. And the Student Assistance Fund is one such fund. Students can apply to this fund online through Self-Service Banner. If you're not familiar with Self-Service Banner, you are going to become familiar with it soon enough. But you can, once you have a login and a password from the institute, if you go on our website, ittralee.ie, you can actually search for Self-Service Banner and you will find a link to it. Self-Service Banner is where you find your exam results, and also you find the application after the 21st of September to the Student Assistance Fund. It'll be open from the 21st of September until the 12th of October. And this fund can help students with some of the costs associated with books and materials, with their living expenses, food, rent, heating, lighting, essential travel, childcare or medical costs. And it is just a contribution. It's just to help top up the funding that the student already has. The Benevolent Fund is another fund on campus. It's administered by Father Donal O'Connor, our chaplain, and this fund provides short-term loans to students who may be struggling to bridge the gaps between when money is coming in and when money is due to go out, or there may be some unexpected emergencies where a student really needs some immediate help. While the Student Assistance Fund takes some time for the payment to issue, usually November, students may need support sooner than that. They may have a bill or a requirement coming up in the nearer future, and Father Donal would be the best person to contact about that. Donal's extension is 1674, so if you were ringing from outside the college, that's 066 719 1674, and his mobile is 086 865 8736, and his email address is chaplain, chaplain, @ittralee.ie. The terms of repayment of the loan are discussed between yourself and Donal. You come to your own arrangements around this. The government laptop scheme is a new scheme that's been introduced this year, just in the last month or so. It is a one-off scheme, and it's very much in response to the COVID situation and the fact that the students and staff are working, living, studying remotely at the moment. So this scheme has provided institutions with some funding to purchase laptops and devices for students who are socioeconomically disadvantaged would be the students on the National Access Plan, for example. So you're talking about mature students, students from the traveller community, ethnic minority groups, lone parents, QQI students, to name a few of the groups that are appearing on the National Access Plan. And this scheme is very much targeted at those students who can demonstrate that they need the device for their study, they do not possess a device already, and they cannot afford to buy one. So in order to assess this, our intention is to run this application process alongside the Student Assistance Fund. So if a student wishes to apply for a loan of a laptop, and it is a loan, the laptops remain the property of the institute and they're to be returned when the student is finished. You can apply again in self-service banner through the Student Assistance Fund application. It should be clear when you log in, we'll have it titled so that you're clear it's the right form. And again, we're going to open that on the 21st of September and close it on the 12th of October. And our goal is to issue the laptops as soon as possible. If anybody has any queries or issues around that, I really would recommend you make contact with us sooner rather than later. Outside of the college in the community, there are a number of financial supports. I'm only familiar with the ones in Kerry, but for everyone I mentioned in Kerry, there may be one in the county that you're from, if you're not from Kerry. So I would recommend that you check locally yourself to see if there are similar funds in your own home county or your own hometown. So in Kerry, we have the Kingdom Education Trust. This trust offers a very limited number of scholarships to students who are resident in Kerry for 3 of the years prior to application, and they're not in receipt of any other source of funding. They're not getting a scholarship, they're not getting fees or maintenance grants from SUSE, they're not on their Back to Education allowance. I beg your pardon, I'm not clear on the Back to Education allowance actually. Please check that directly with Deirdre Kieran or Mairead O'Sullivan. They're the education officers in North, East, West Kerry Development and South Kerry Development Partnership. So if you feel that you need to piece together support, which is not unusual, sometimes students need to apply to a number of funds to be able to afford their costs, then please make contact with Deirdre if you live in the North Kerry area, or Mairead O'Sullivan if you live in the South Kerry area. Cara Credit Union offer education awards. This is for members of Cara Credit Union. So Cara Credit Union was Tralee, Killorglin and Castle Island, and they are offering education awards to their members. It's like a raffle. You complete their application form, which is online on their website, caracreditunion.ie. It's open until the 1st of October, and literally if your name comes out of the hat, then you would be awarded €1,500, and they have 5 of these awards for undergraduate students. They have a separate one, the Dan Kelleher Memorial Fund, for postgraduate students. The St. Vincent de Paul Society over the years has also been a marvellous support to many of our students. They've supported some students through hampers and vouchers, but also through the education grant. And again, for students who are experiencing extreme difficulty with accessing college financially, the Vincent de Paul is another agency to contact. In Tralee, they're based in Friary Lane, and their number is 066 712 2706. If you're not from the Kerry area or the Tralee area, usually you're advised to contact your local Vincent de Paul office or the local chapter. At this point, I just want to make a reference. If you were with us yesterday for Mature Student Orientation, you may remember me talking about students changing direction. And I'm just going to mention it here again because it lines up particularly with your finances. For whatever reason, sometimes a student may need to consider leaving college without finishing. It could be something completely unexpected and something that's completely out of their control. And what I would ask students is, if this arises for you, to please speak with somebody. You can speak with me, maybe the careers officer, your class tutor, your head of department. I think in the first instance, it's important to approach somebody you actually feel is approachable so that you feel comfortable discussing what your situation actually is. And then they will point you to who you might need to speak to in a more official capacity to officially withdraw from the college course if that's what you need to do. I know when sometimes I think students may not approach us because they've made their mind up and they're afraid we're going to try and talk them out of it. And I know for myself that wouldn't be my approach. I like to make sure that before a person leaves, that they do know all of the supports available, not just financially. Sometimes it's around flexibility, and they need a little flexibility from the college. And until you have that conversation with somebody, you don't always know what we can do. We don't always put out every scenario out there for everyone to hear. We really deal with these cases on a case-by-case basis. So if you are in a situation that you are struggling with access to college, please speak with somebody. Please let us know what's going on for you, and be aware of all the supports before you make your final decision. And it is important that we support you to leave in a structured way as it is that we support you to stay. If leaving is what you need to do, we need to respect it. So in those situations, if you think back to your SUSI grant, think back to your free fees initiative, think back to education allowance, these types of payments and schemes are on a rolling basis. And if you leave, but you don't tell any of the organisers of these schemes that you've left, your scheme might keep running. So for example, Tralee gets paid student contribution charge for every student who comes. We get paid fees by the department for every student, and we keep drawing that down as long as we know you're here. So if you've left, it's really important to tell us you've left, so we stop drawing down that money. Because if you return to college later, you'll be billed for the fees in the new year, or part of the fees in the new year if you've actually stopped. So it's just important to have that conversation and try and freeze as much of your entitlements as possible in case you need them again later on. Sometimes students say to me 5 years later that they just slipped away quietly and now they're back and they didn't realise that they should have stopped everything at the time, and there's nothing anyone can do about it now. So just to be aware of that, look after yourselves in that regard.
Information on this video presentation is a guide only. Schemes are continuously subject to change. Students are advised to confirm their entitlements with the relevant agency directly. Thank you.